Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Sam Koslowski.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
Australia's biggest tech companies have cut thousands of jobs in a matter of weeks, and they're all pointing to the same reason, and that's AI. But experts say the picture is slightly more complicated than the headlines, which often invoke fear in most of us across almost any line of work. So today, I thought Billi and I would break down all the latest developments.
Sam, before we get into the developments, I want to set up that at the Daily Aus, you are the go-to person when it comes to AI. You obsess over it more than anyone I know. And I'm interested in the intro, you said that it invokes fear in most of us because you tend to have quite a positive view in terms of what it could do for the Daily Aus and then also other companies.
I think it has a lot of positives, even for somebody who wants to get on top of life admin, which is everyone. But I have felt over the last kind of 12 months especially that I'm in the minority here. I do feel like overall there are more conversations about this as a really scary idea than there are about the opportunities. And I completely understand that. But I think it's a really important part of our media news cycle to at least acknowledge and address when we're reading stories like the one we're going to talk about today about job cuts. It's really serious. It's got a human face to it. But yes, I'm glad you acknowledge my optimism because it is important in the framing of all of this.
Yes. And I think where the fear can come from is just the speed at which everything is changing.
Totally.
Let's talk about the job cuts that major tech companies have announced in Australia, but also around the world. I want to start with one of the biggest companies in Australia, Atlassian. They had news last week that they were cutting quite a significant portion of their workforce, or about 10%. Is that right?
10% of the global workforce, 1 in 3 of their Australian workforce, though. So, I mean, we're talking here about 1,600 people around the world. So Atlassian is headquartered in Sydney. It's a global tech company. The two founders, Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar, they're the two wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in Australia, maybe tied neck and neck with the folks at Canva. So this is a massive tech company. It's listed in America. And they sacked 1,600 people, 480 jobs in Australia. The CEO, Mike Cannon-Brookes, he said in a video message to staff, "I know there are real consequences for everybody, their families, their career plans, their friendships," but he was very direct about the reason why. And it was the increasing adoption of artificial intelligence across their business.
One thing, I read his statement and he did seem to have more nuance in the statement in terms of saying that it wasn't that AI was necessarily replacing the jobs, and these are his words, but that it was the jobs are changing.
Yeah, I mean, in the same announcement, he also acknowledged that they are putting out about 160 new jobs on the market.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, so there's this kind of double-edged sword here where, and I wanted to kind of thread this throughout, that there are opportunities for job creation, according to experts as well. Again, that might be my optimism coming through. We're going to try and keep this as balanced as possible for something so close to all of our lives. But yeah, it's a complicated one. But I mean, reading some of the LinkedIn statements from people who had just lost their jobs, we're talking about one worker who was 200 days into their maternity leave. Then we've got another Sydney-based software engineer. He had been at Atlassian for 16 years and he got let go via an email. So there was a lot of pain within the Australian tech community and a very human cost.
And that human cost of people losing their jobs as the skills required in jobs changes, that's not specific to Atlassian. That is something that we have seen across different companies across Australia and then also overseas.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not different, but what is different about where we are in the point of time is the frequency of these announcements. I mean, 2 weeks ago, WiseTech Global, which is Australia's largest locally listed tech company, it announced it would cut around 2,000 jobs over the next 2 years. That's more than a quarter of its global workforce. Block, the company that owns Afterpay, it announced it was cutting nearly half its workforce, also citing AI. But it's not just the tech companies. I mean, any company that's using technology, which is pretty much every large corporation, they're also kind of looking for, in all of their annual reports, they're foreshadowing job losses in the future, a restructured workforce, reskilled, a lot of those sorts of words. So we're talking about banks, we're talking about medical companies, we're talking about construction companies. Everything is being impacted here.
I feel like just over the past 2 weeks, it has really dawned on me just how much jobs across every industry are changing.
Yeah.
And I have an example because someone brought this up with me the other night at the pub, saying that it's changing for models. And they brought up a very popular fashion brand in Australia.
Yep.
And they showed me a photo of this beautiful new campaign that they have. And they said that model doesn't exist. That model is AI. And you genuinely never would have been able to tell. And when I looked at the comments, it was somehow known that this was AI. A few people did know. And the fashion brand actually responded to comments saying, yes, this is an AI model that we have produced with an AI artist. And that just goes to show how the job market is completely changing and the skills required for these things. Like where once you needed to be a model, you now are an AI artist. That's just one example of one person, but it was so interesting.
I cannot think of an industry where I have not personally had a discussion with somebody in that industry who says I'm completely unaffected.
Yes.
I mean, even those like intensely service-based industries, people working in hospitals who are hands-on with patients in long recoveries, even they are using AI for writing better patient notes or speeding up the admin that they have to do. So, you know, no one really can say that they are not at all going to be impacted by this.
And that's the thing, that we know it's going to impact everyone, but there are some people who will be impacted more than others.
Yeah.
What do we know about who will be impacted the most?
So I think the most comprehensive analysis of this really big question comes from Jobs and Skills Australia, the federal department, and they released a major report on this late last year, and it found that about 79% of Australians, so 4 in 5 of us, are in jobs with low automation exposure, and that means AI is unlikely to fully replace what they do. But, and this is the important bit, around 87% of workers are in jobs where AI could materially reshape how the work gets done.
Right.
So I think that distinction really matters a lot. So there is a distinction here between AI fully replacing your job and AI changing your job. And the language the agency is using is automation and augmentation. So automation just means the machine is doing the task instead of you. But augmentation means the machine is helping you do your task better and faster. And so their finding is that the augmentation, AI changing how you work, that's more likely to be felt by everybody rather than I don't have a job tomorrow because AI is here today.
Although that is something that, as we have seen in the past month, is happening to a lot of people.
Millions of workers are going to have to adapt to that scenario for sure.
I mean, just to give an example of the automation, I don't know much about coding, but what I do know is that even at the Daily Aus, we used to have someone who would write all of the code of our website. I now know that there is something called vibe coding, where basically you just tell AI what you want to create, just in normal plain English, and it does all of the code for you.
Yeah. And just to clarify, he left because he got a way better job.
Not because of AI.
Not because
Sorry.
of AI. But yes, you're right. I mean, I'm vibe coding a lot. And just this week, I looked at something that is a software program that we spend about $800 a month on, and I built it. I built it myself. And so the questions that remain about what I built, and this is what the technological community would say, is it secure to put our data through? I have no idea about online cybersecurity.
Which is why we have not rolled it out.
Exactly. Is it sustainable and will it crash in a week? I mean, are we building kind
Potentially.
of... Potentially. I would say probably.
Yes.
And so there is still a long way to go before we just kind of get rid of any sort of software skills. But I'm pretty comfortable with what I've built. So it's a really interesting... I mean, I'm a nerd in this space, as we have acknowledged, but it's an interesting change to the workforce.
Hey guys, this is my friend Rosa. Say hi, Rosa.
Hi, Rosa.
She's cooking up the deep dive video that you're watching right now. Rosa, what do you want them to do?
Subscribe.
You heard the woman. Now back to the video.
Sam, I do want to get to TDA, but first, before we came in here, you mentioned that the Jobs and Skills Australia report, is that the right name?
Yeah.
The Jobs and Skills Australia report said that there was a difference between genders of how we will all be impacted. What did it say?
So when it went through and identified the careers that are most likely to be first replaced by AI, they were talking about things like keyboard operators, telemarketers, call center workers, accounting clerks, receptionists. And because there's an overrepresentation of women in those careers, the report then said that, 36% of women in the workforce fall into this disrupted category compared to 26% of men. And so they recommended that policymakers and employers need to pay close attention to this. And I think overlaying some, socioeconomic barriers that are in place, language barriers, ability to access good technology. A good computer means that you're going to be able to build with AI a lot faster than if you have a bad computer. And there's a big difference in price in all of that. So I think overlaying some of those broader factors that exist in society around these findings is really important.
Can I just pick up on something you said there? You said you need a better computer in order to build with AI.
Yeah.
Do you need to build with AI in order to implement AI into your workflow?
No, I think build was probably a bad choice of words there for me. To use AI at a really large scale, and what I mean by that is, let's say that you're a call center worker and your boss has said, we're going to send you a file via some AI program that has the phone numbers of 100,000 people that you need to call. Your computer needs to handle a file with 100,000 rows in a Excel or Google spreadsheet. That's a big file. And so because you're expected to get through that work faster in a call center because of some, AI aspect to it all, you have to handle larger, packages of information. So it's not necessarily building something, but if you're, trying to generate an image because your workplace has told you that they're not going to hire, as you said before, a model or a photographer, then generating an image will take a lot more brain power in your computer. So there's all of those kind of things.
So if someone's listening to this and is thinking about whether or not their job is safe, where do you think this conversation leaves them or leaves all of us? Because that's something that we've all thought about, right?
I think we're going to have to keep checking in with each other to see how this conversation evolves. You said earlier that the thing that struck you is just how fast this is moving. It struck me as well. I mean, things are moving at wild pace. But at the moment, I think there's kind of no core consensus with how safe we all are. There seems to be two big agreed ideas. One is that human skills really matter. And so things like decision-making, empathy, communication, the ability to have good conversations in person, those skills are actually going to get more important. And so one thing you can do to try and make sure that you're a worthwhile employee to keep around in the future is invest in those skills and get better at your human connections. And the other really agreed upon core consensus is that those workers who are the most at risk are the ones who are waiting for their jobs to be disrupted and that they're not learning at least or getting exposed to the tools that are out there. And there was this fantastic line from an Australian innovation expert who said, it only takes 30 hours to become a very good AI operator. And that was really reassuring for me because I don't have a coding background at all. I've never written any sort of code. I'm not naturally good at using this sort of software. And this isn't about getting a new university degree. This is about watching some tutorials online. And so the barriers to entry are quite low when you think about how you can actually just at least get exposed to these kind of tools. Again, optimist, I'm sorry. And I know that I might get some unpleasant comments from listeners in the way that I'm framing things, but I'm trying to balance all of this out. The truth is that this kind of wave is here.
I think one thing that I want to talk about is, we're talking about other workplaces, but we are currently sitting in a workplace, the Daily Aus.
We are.
And these are conversations that we're obviously having not in the podcast studio, off mic, about how we approach it. And I think, the lower barrier to entry is one thing, but also the hesitancy around, is this ethical to use? And especially for journalism where, your voice is really important and, there are very clear processes about what you should do in order to produce quality journalism and the question of whether or not AI can do that.
Yeah.
I think there's two things there. It's not just, can I do this or can I not? It's also, do I want to do this? And do I want my work to go down this path? And I mean, we're talking about difficult conversations that other workplaces are having and other companies are having, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we are also having these conversations internally. We've had many conversations, disagreements about what we should do. And I think the clear thing is that no one knows the answer.
No, and I mean, another aspect that you haven't mentioned is how much we've talked about the environmental impact of this changing strategy of different ways of working. So this is incredibly complex. And I mean, many of the lines that you read from workers before the internet was around have a similar sentiment behind them, which is that as humans, we need stability. We need to be able to see what's coming up. And there are these particular moments in time where it's harder to do so than others. And whether that's a pandemic or a technological innovation that we kind of didn't see coming at the pace that it has, I think that it's perfectly reasonable for everybody to be thinking, not just how do I get on top of it, but do I actually want this? And do I actually want to have my work changed in this way? It's a difficult one to answer because then you have to overlay the fact that you need to make a buck. And you need to stay employed. And if your boss, Sam, says, we'd like you to start using this tool,
then it's lucky you have a Billi to say, well, hold on, guys.
And that's what makes this podcast great, hopefully, is that, we can have some disagreements about all of this. We're going to make some, glorious mistakes, I'm sure, but it's here. And I think at one level, I'm quite a realist in that I'm raring to go when I am put in a scenario and said, this is the state of play now.
And just to be clear, the Daily Aus is not looking at replacing anyone or anything like that. That has never been our approach, and we're a small enough company that is not required.
Yeah.
But it's about how, like we've talked about, how do we change our skill sets? Even something as simple as proofreading. Is that something now that, we don't need the editors to be spending time on, and instead they can work with journalists on the best angle and the best way to approach a story?
Yeah.
But something like proofreading, that doesn't need to happen through a person as much.
I know you would never say something like this, but I've been trying to kind of prick my ears up when I hear people talking about things they don't like doing. And I'm trying to work out, okay, you've said you don't like this particular task. Let me figure out with you a way that perhaps AI could be helpful there.
You're saying I would never say I don't like doing a job.
Billi, you love 100% of your job.
Sam, thank you for explaining all of that. And
thanks, Billi.
For having such an open conversation.
Of course.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We'll be back later this afternoon, but until then, we hope you have a lovely afternoon.